Okay, we'll see if this works. Hopefully this works. I've been struggling mightily with my audio. If my audio isn't working, no one will ever see this because I'd be dead. If once I realize that after however long this takes me doesn't work, I'll die. So hopefully this is not for nothing. Um, Cold War. Going to go through this as quickly as possible because I spent a lot of time now just fiddling with uh, the tech, and I'm not feeling it anymore. Um, okay, let's go. The first few slides we've gone through already, and I'm happy to go through them again in class. But just to say that the Cold War is a period of positives and negatives, very Hegelian here. On the one hand, this, on the other hand, that. Good things for the United States over here, kind of bad decisions over there. And a lot of this stuff is very much with us in the present moment. Race and civil rights, a booming economy slash busted economy, all of the kind of stuff that we deal with today. Political division, people lying about stuff, just like lying about whatever, like politically. That a lot of it can be traced um, or connected to the past. We did this, talked about this, the divisions, political shifts, the emergence of Sunbelt conservatives, the beginning of some rifts in the Democratic Party when Democrats start pushing for civil rights. White Democrats say, "Hold up now, that's not what we're talking about." The Dixiecrats, in some ways, are considered like the emergence of the Dixiecrats. But Dixiecrats are OG Democrats, right? White Southern racist Democrats. That ain't nothing new. Similarly, when we talk about the rise of Sunbelt conservatism, Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, Nixon, and them, it's something new, but it's not. It's Herbert Hoover, right? It's the kind of conservatism that was common before the New Deal. And it will push back against the New Deal until effectively it's completely dismantled. So new things, old things, continuity, change, all that. As talking in this kind of with this rhetoric to get us thinking about the AP exam. GI Bill talked about all of this, Levittown's Lakewood model, privatization, the growth of the Sun Belt. Irony, of course, being that the most staunchly kind of anti-New Deal conservative beliefs come out of a region that is whole cloth created through the New Deal, right? Through government spending and wartime spending. So irony there. Post-war problems talked about this. Communism. What is Marxism? What is capitalism? Talked about this in class. And then, of course, the old trickety trick of equating civil rights, union demands, and New Deal policies. Marxism. Is demanding racial equality Marxism? No. But it makes your argument a lot easier against racial equality when you say it is. Is paying American workers a decent wage Marxism? No. But it makes your argument a lot easier when you say that it is. Is like common sense government spending that is the hallmark of every developed country in the world Marxism? No, but you see where I'm going with this. Politics is not about who is right and who is factually in the right. Politics is about winning. So if lying helps you win, you lie. And that is what we see in the kind of anti-communism of the House Un-American Activities Committee with McCarthy. All of this stuff where just, call your opponent a Marxist or a communist or whatever, and you win the argument. It's got to be some kind of logical fallacy. A debate, folks, you can tell me. Okay, Tsar Bomba in the background. We will go over this in class, so I'm not going to belabor this point either. Effectively talking about the ideological conflict and the real conflict. As I said, the Cold War is a conflict of ideologies. Marxism versus capitalism. Marxism being an economic doctrine and a political doctrine wrapped into one. Capitalism being just an economic doctrine. Democracy is the political doctrine. And democracy and capitalism are not the same thing. But with communism, kind of the same, right? You get the communism, the economics, and the politics in one. They don't play nice together. That's the ideological conflict. Talk about this in class. And then there's a real conflict of perception or mutual misperception on the part of both countries. Third world unrest. Going to be talking about this one in class as well. It is imperative that we remember period 7 when studying period 8, because a lot of the conflict that we're going to see, especially in the developing world or third world as it was known, is rooted in American imperialism, French imperialism, English imperialism. And I'll talk more about this in class. The resume of these various conflicts, not good looks generally for either side. The United States in particular, being an advocate for democracy, not a good look when you overthrow democratically elected governments just because they believe in, in socialist policies. Not a good look. We will talk about this in class. The various challenges in Asia, from Korea, China, down to Southeast Asia. I'll mention it in class, go into more detail. And then the various challenges of the Middle East. Also, we'll talk about this in class. This is also an imperialist legacies of imperialism at play here in both the conflict in Iran, in Egypt, Palestine, and Israel. All of this stuff is about empire, and suddenly, right, the Soviet Union and the United States are going to play out their conflict in the wake of imperialism. Okay, skipped a lot there, and I will do it in class, and we'll do it live, but let's talk about, still moving quickly, with alacrity, as they say, origins of the Cold War. I will have talked about this already now at this point, if you've watched my in-class video already. That's Germany in the background, divided up into various zones: American zone, Soviet zone, British, French zone. And it's pretty even. Berlin is the one exception, right? If you look right here, that's Berlin. And they got little, like, it's like a baby version of the nation in, right? You got 4 little zones in there too. That's going to be, right, relevant. Yalta Conference. I would never say, like, let's try to see where Stalin is coming from. I don't think is the way you want to kind of start off a phrase here. But let's understand that Stalin is worried about this happening again. Soviet Union, Germany's popped off a couple times now, and the Russians don't want it to have it happen again, and they want Eastern Europe on their side, right? They want a kind of almost a buffer zone for the next time Germany pops off. There's also certain arguments made about cultural affinities between, the people of Eastern Europe and, other Slavic, right, nations. But again, we don't have to take Stalin's word for it here, right? Stalin obviously has political interests in expanding the sphere of influence of his of the Soviet Union, and expanding the countries with whom the Soviet Union can trade, right? In order to keep a communist economic system going, right, you need to have trading partners. You need to have money in circulation. Just because it's a state-run economy doesn't mean you can't, like, you don't need trade. You do. The United States wants the same thing. They want democratic elections. They want free markets. So free markets, state-planned economies, not going to play nice together, right? They're two kind of like parasitic versions. It's one or the other, right? One is going to eat, this one's going to eat that one, or that one's going to eat this one. They're not going to, there's no symbiosis here. Eastern Europe, meanwhile, is caught between all this, right? They want self-determination. They want to be able to elect their own governments. Maybe it's going to be free market oriented and maybe not. Maybe it's going to be socialist. Maybe it's going to be a planned economy. Bulgaria, Poland, they have governments that are pro-Soviet, kind of a little bit like, I think the book says client states or puppet states. Yugoslavia and Albania, on the other hand, they have communist governments that are not aligned with the Soviets, right? Tito in Yugoslavia, for example, had a pretty, and Enver Hoxha in Albania have antagonistic relationships to the Soviet Union. And in the case of Enver Hoxha in Albania, actually has a better relationship with China. But we're kind of getting like inside baseball here. U.S. cuts off aid to the Soviet Union. Remember, the Soviet Union has only been recognized by the United States in 1933 by Roosevelt. And as I have already said now in the lecture that you'll have watched in class, there's been tension between the United States and the Russians since the revolution, when the United States backed the losing side in that revolution. United Nations is founded in 1951, supposed to bring nations together. We get the whole Warsaw Pact response, all that. The Iron Curtain, famous Iron Curtain speech. Where's that saying come from? It comes from a Churchill speech, 1946, right? An Iron Curtain was descending over Eastern Europe, dividing the communist East from a capitalist West. And this is the conflict to come. It is, however iron that curtain is, and however cold the Cold War is, the two sides engage frequently, and the conflict is hot. It's just not hot in Europe. It's going to make a mess in Latin America. It's going to make a mess in the Middle East. It's going to make a mess in Southeast Asia. It's going to make a mess in Africa. So the only way in which it is cold is that it's European nations, the Russians being kind of like literally on the border of Europe, but effectively European nations not going to war, right? But there's a lot of other wars going on and a lot of other mess, the cleanup of which we're still dealing with. Why does containment matter? 1947, George Kennan publishes anonymously under the pseudonym Mr. X. This is obviously before Malcolm X, right? So the X has a different connotation, I suppose, in 1947. Publishes an influential article in Foreign Affairs, and he says that Soviet expansion can be contained without going to war. This is the policy, right? Communism wants to expand, and the West, then the leader of the West, the United States, says we don't want you to expand. Why does this matter? This matters because this is actually pretty, think about this, right? This is how can we need to engage with a hostile power and not go to war. How do we do that? This is where we get proxy wars, because it is containment in one way, but how you contain is a lot of mess, right, in the developing world. So the idea here being is that they're right. Inherently, this is a conflict that's going to happen. How do we avoid it? Containment. The book, this Munich analogy that the book talks about, it's a little overwrought or overdetermined, we might say. In that it's kind of wants to put all the eggs in one basket of the Munich analogy. The Munich analogy is kind of like a poor man's ideology. The Cold War conflict is a lot more complicated than just people saying this is like Munich, that's like Munich. As you saw with the Chris Matthews hardball clip, it is not enough to scream appeasement and have an argument make sense, right? The analogy here is more accurate, perhaps, but still, the Munich analogy I feel is a little overdetermined, and I'm frankly a little surprised that so much weight is placed on it in the book. But there might be political reasons for that. I don't know. It's not a yes, the Cold War is real. Yes, the conflict is real. But to say that, the Munich analogy is important, it's like it's pop foreign affairs. It's not really complicated stuff. Okay, Berlin blockade, 1948. Marshall Plan I'll have talked about here. Soviets blockade West Berlin. They want to hang on to it. They think that that the West will kind of flinch. They don't. What do? Big airlift. So this is a huge deal, right? 200,000 flights in a year, all kinds of stuff. The Soviets eventually back down. Really, this is like a turning point, right? Turning point of the Cold War, really turning point into the Cold War, and that this is a huge victory for the forces that back, right, the United States, the West, and capitalism, free market economics. I include this image simply because this was one of the images, I think, for SAQ a few years ago. And it was exactly a reference to the Berlin airlift as a McDonnell Douglas ad, dropping milk to the little German children. And obviously it was kind of made fun of on Reddit and stuff. But if you did your homework, you would obviously have known this is a reference to the Berlin airlift. You'd have gotten those points on that SAQ. 1949, not a good year if you don't like communism. USSR, they got an atomic bomb too now. So the United States is not the only bully on the block with the bomb. So that's a big L. And then China, that's a big L too. So this does not look good, right? If you're an American in 1949, it doesn't look really good. It looks like the momentum is certainly, what's that meme with the kid, they had us in the first half. This is definitely like they got us in the first half here, if you're the United States. And as it turns out, there will be antagonism between the Soviets and the Russians, but we're not quite there yet. Cold War heats up. This is Korea. This is the first big proxy war. The GIF is, if you watch the dates from 50 to 53, the red being, as it always is, the communists, and the green being, it's not just the United States, remember, this is a multinational coalition that goes to war here, the UN. 50, right, they almost had to go to the Yalu River in the north, and then the North Koreans, with the help of the Chinese, push almost all the way down to Busan in the southeast, and then they end up where they started, around the what is now the DMV, the demilitarized zone. Did I say DMV? DMZ. DMZ. So that's the two sides, right? You got NATO on the one side, Warsaw Pact on the other. On the other side of the world, you have a divided peninsula in Korea. Both sides are puppet governments. In the north, it's, as we say in the United States, Singmin-ri, which in Korean is Lee Seung-man. I only bring out the Hangul to highlight how interesting it is that it is Kim Il-sung. So in Korean, right, Kim is the last name, and then E is the last name for Syngman-rhee. It's anglicized with R-H-E-E, which is less common than Lee. But that, Syngman-rhee has a westernized, not only name, but also the order of the appellate name and the given name, where Kim, no one says Il-sung Kim, right? It's Kim Il-sung. It's kind of like more foreign that way, where Lee Seung-man is Syngmin-rhee, which is a more anglicized, sounds more Western. The last name is where it belongs, right? In the back of the name, the last name. Anyway. Those are the two, right? Lee Seung-man and Kim Il-sung, both puppets. One a puppet of the communist forces, right? China and Russia, really. And then the other, the puppet of the United States. Syngman-rhee, not a nice guy. Cracks down on popular movements, popular uprisings, again, in the spirit of virulent anti-communism. People who just want more, freedom of students who want freedom of speech suddenly found themselves getting their heads cracked open by the leadership. The North, in Kim Il Sung, senses weakness, invades after 3 really terrible years of war. It's a stalemate. It's still a stalemate, right? It's not, the war is not officially over. And whatever happens there, that's another, you can take a class on it in college, but it's going to be a mess whenever the regime in the North collapses. But that's the Korean War. Eisenhower. Look, guys, I know you all want to build your resumes up and have good-looking resumes. Now, born in Texas, 1890, grew up in Kansas, kind of regular life. 7 sons. He's the third, right? So Eisenhower's not 3 people, but he's the third of he's the number 3 of 7. Good at sports, goes to West Point. Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. You're probably not going to be having that on your vita anytime soon. Planned and executed the successful invasion of continental Europe, D-Day. Pretty good. 5-star general. Yeah. He's probably going to win this election. In 1952, goes up against Adlai Stevenson. I'm not going to belabor this. It's first time that television plays a major role. It'll play a real major role in 1960. Calls for modern republicanism. So on this one hand, moderating the New Deal, right? He's not trying to overthrow the New Deal. That's why Eisenhower is kind of like exceptional in the history of 20th century Republicans and 21st century Republicans, I suppose, and late 19th century Republicans, and that he's not trying to get rid of like everything. He likes government. He thinks government can help people. 1952, people are happy with a lot of these programs that are put in place under the New Deal. They like minimum wages. They like job security. They like Social Security because they're like good programs, right? And people like them. Not trying to get rid of them. How does he do this? The economy. Economy is booming, so he can expand programs and be fiscally conservative because the economy is so hot. As we see up here, right? This thing, though, right? Democrats soft on communism. That will become the central platform of the Republican Party, at least in attacking the Democrats. So in Eisenhower, we see these 2 things. On the one hand, this modern republicanism of let's just accept that, we're going to have social programs. The government is going to play a larger role in people's lives. And it's not Stalin, right? It's happening in France. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in England. It's happening all over the developed world. So we're fine with that. We're still going to balance the budget. But we're also going to be anti-communist. That latter piece is the piece that really starts to take hold, largely because of, last point here. 20 years of Democratic presidents, the majority of which is just FDR. So it's just Truman is the only other guy. So the reason why that takes off, the anti-communism, is the vice president, Richard Nixon, makes a name for himself again in his anti-communism. We're not going to watch the Checker speech. We just don't have time, but you can watch it on your own. Just watch the last 3 minutes. We're going to keep him. He was given a dog. His family was given a dog, and it was seen as some kind of campaign finance thing or, whatever, and he kept the dog. He, not Eisenhower, but Nixon will be kind of the standard bearer of the Republican Party. Inconceivably so, right? Because Nixon's political story is, Shakespeare couldn't have written it any better in terms of his rise again, and fall again. It is a story that if you want a good story of American politics, like it or you don't have to like Richard Nixon, but his story is, don't get him tattooed on your back. I wouldn't go that far, but his political story is Shakespearean, amazing. More on that later. Eisenhower's leadership is often praised for his leadership style, as you might imagine. People who are 4-star generals who lead the campaign of D-Day are good at getting people to do what they say. Hidden hand presidency, so people said, he's out golfing all the time. Right? He's always out golfing. But he delegated responsibility, as good leaders do. He trusted the people on his team, like good leaders do, hired the best. As they said, 9 millionaires and a plumber. The plumber was a Democrat. He doesn't last that long, just gets the millionaires. Delegates authority, runs it like military operations chain of command. And I mean, in terms of Eisenhower's leadership, this is something that when people are interested in studying leadership, it is his style that is often, right, praised, because he gets people to want to do the thing he wants them to do. He gets people to want to work hard to achieve the end that he wants. And that's what good leaders do. They don't cajole, they don't force you to do stuff. They get you on board, as they say. National Highway Act, this is a big deal, right? This is an Eisenhower thing. FDR couldn't have thought of it any better. This is a big federal spending program. I mean, just imagine, people talk about Route 66, right? You know how you got from Chicago to Los Angeles before the Federal Highway Act? Like driving on a road with like two cars going the other way, like like any other road. Route 66 is, in Southern California at least, Huntington Drive, in Pasadena, San Marino, Sunset, and then you can, if you wanted to, drive all the way. You've seen cars, you know what happens here, right? All the towns dry up or whatever. But you could drive that street all the way to Chicago. Not really, right? Not nice if you want a nice trip, but this 42,000 miles of highway, linking major cities, big deal. It is highways in the name of national defense. That you can't, what happens if the Soviets invaded? You need to move troops. You need to move, eventually ICBMs. Again, they're still like dropping bombs from planes at this point, but eventually we'll have, missiles. Eisenhower in the Cold War. Foreign policy is a big deal, as I'll talk about. During the Eisenhower administration, he thinks that Truman is a little soft on communism. John Foster Dulles, like Dulles Airport, is the Secretary of State. Doesn't like the containment policy, wants to have a more muscular foreign policy, wants to basically bring the communists to the brink of war. That's where we get the idea of brinksmanship. Right, you bring the communists to the brink of war. John Foster. I mean, none of you have seen Dr. Strangelove, which is a movie that, again, you've never seen, but there's this kind of character that's like very Dulles-like in it that wants to bomb everything. Nuclear weapons instead of conventional forces. More bang for your buck. That's where this phrase comes from. Right, literal bang. We're talking about like things that explode. So if you're going to invest money, invest in nukes, invest in, again, eventually ICBMs, but not at this point. And that's how because we have more money than the Soviets. The United States has more, the capacity to innovate more. That's the argument. Not a great look if you like the planet Earth. Also not a great look if you're any other country in the world that isn't like the several hundred people who are in charge in the United States and this, several people who are in charge in the Soviet Union, right? Everyone else is kind of like, do you guys know what you're doing? Eisenhower Doctrine. This is going back a little bit. Aid Middle Eastern countries that are threatened by communism. Again, go back to Aristotle for this one. In his Politics, book 3 of the Politics, Aristotle says, "For when there are many who are deprived of prerogatives or rights, and poor, that city is necessarily filled with enemies." There's a lot of poor people in the country, you're going to have a revolution. Aristotle knew it in the 5th century, and Eisenhower knows it in the 1950s. If you have countries that are struggling economically, if you especially have countries that are struggling economically and are legacies of an imperial project, right, who've been controlled and have had their resources extracted and have been forced to labor for a long time, you give them a copy of some Marx and an AK-47, they're going to go, oh, yeah, this makes sense. So that's a problem. That's why there's so much spending in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe. The United States, because of all that spending, becomes the most influential country in the world, obviously competing with the Soviets. I'm at the end of this thing. Did I do this in 30 minutes? I cut a lot out. I think there's about 24 slides that I cut out. This we'll talk more about later. Nikita Khrushchev, man, is he something? These are all pictures of Khrushchev in both the United States and then obviously in the lower right in Cuba. He becomes the premier in 56. He begins a campaign of de-Stalinifying the Soviet Union. He starts to try to reckon with all the bad stuff the Soviets, Stalin in particular, and Beria and Molotov, all Stalin's, his peeps, have done. A lot to say about Khrushchev too in terms of interesting political characters. We'll watch a couple cartoons, one on Castro, one on Khrushchev, one on Kennedy in class, and write a little bit about them. But he wants to have peaceful coexistence with the U.S. That's what he's claiming, at least, right? He actually comes to the United States and is incredibly popular because he's like this he's a peasant. So he goes to like Iowa and he's like grabbing chickens and drinking beer and like, shaking people's hand vigorously. And like people are like, this guy's all right. So he wants peaceful coexistence. Sadly, that is put on the back burner with the U-2 incident. A U-2 spy plane. This is probably in the next chapter, so I could probably skip it. The Russians shoot down a spy plane. They capture the pilot, and the tensions start to ramp up again. So there's a brief moment, and then we'll get the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that stuff that I'm skipping because we're going to watch some cartoons on it in class. So hopefully, maybe we did that already. Maybe you're looking forward to it one way or another. This is done. I can't believe the timing cannot be right, but here we are. Wonderful. That's that for this. The next chapter of our book, chapter 26, I believe, is effectively the same time period, but more domestic stuff, not international relations stuff. So this is the Cold War. That will be conservatism and civil rights, I reckon. All right.